Of course, you are famously associated with being able to pay off debt, to be able to put us into surplus. We're way away from that. A global pandemic absolutely made that the case. And there'll be a lot of people watching tonight who were quite passionate about your government, quite fond of it in its memory, who are frustrated with those two indices about budget deficits and debt that exists now. When you look at those ways of viewing the country, is there further explanation that people need, or it is a disappointment that...
Well, I think we have to understand that the country went into debt because the government had closed it down and created a recession because of the pandemic in the name of saving Australian lives. And naturally, having closed the place down, it had an obligation to open it up again, and that's why it went into debt. And I quite openly acknowledge that I talked to Josh Frydenberg and Scott Morrison about this at the time, and they said, we're going to have to spend an enormous amount of money. And I said, well, you've closed the show down. You've got to do it. And this recession that we bailed the country out of with the expenditure of all of that money, which has caused the debt, it was unique. All the other recessions we've had were because of market failure, government policy failure. But here was a government, along with the state government, saying to the community, we're going to close things down to try and squeeze the pandemic out of the system. And having done that, the government had to bail things out, and that's why we had JobKeeper. And the only way you can explain that is to tell it precisely as it is. And that is, to my understanding, that's the proper explanation, and I think we just have to grow our way out of that.
I think JobKeeper saved the country. I hope the government talks about it a lot because as a bloke who's spent lots of time, both politically and in the real life in shopping centres, you can meet a dozen people a day who the only reason they're standing now is because of JobKeeper.
That's right. And it was generous, even indulgent, but you have to err on the side of generosity when you're bailing people out who, through no fault of their own, all those poor wretches that started small businesses a couple of weeks before the pandemic hit, and then they were told, well, you can't operate your business, and they borrowed money, and they had to be helped. It was an atypical emergency. The government created the emergency in response to the pandemic, and it had an obligation to go the next step, and that is bail people out on condition that the measures stopped when they were meant to stop, and on condition that we all understood as a community we had to grow our way out of the enormous debt, and we'll have to do that over years into the future.